Imagine a forest, ancient and indifferent. The Douglas firs of Oregon stand in silent judgment, their canopies so dense they turn midday into a perpetual twilight. It is a place of profound beauty and profound isolation, where a single misplaced step can lead you away from the world you know. A child's backpack does not belong here, not dangling from a branch 30 feet above the forest floor, a synthetic blue specter against the rough, dark bark. It hung there for years, a question without an answer, its zippers shut tight against the wind and the rain, a time capsule of a single terrible afternoon. The object, when it was finally spotted, was almost dismissed as a piece of forgotten logging equipment or a bizarrely shaped hornet's nest. 2 college students, hikers, straying from the marked path in search of a rumored waterfall, were the ones to find it. 8 years had passed since the day 7-year-old Leo Carter vanished from this same stretch of the Mount Hood National Forest. 8 years of silence, of cold trails and unanswered prayers. And now, this impossible discovery, a small nylon pack hanging impossibly high, a final cryptic message from a ghost. Enough Leo Carter was, by all accounts, an entirely ordinary and wonderful little boy. He possessed a boundless energy that his parents, Mark and Sarah, found both exhausting and enchanting. He had a gap-toothed smile and a love for his red rubber playground ball that bordered on obsession. On that day, a perfect Saturday, in late August of 2017, the Carter family was doing what countless other Oregon families did, escaping the city for a picnic under the vast green canopy of the National Forest. They chose a spot at the Trillium Creek campground, a place known for its gentle trails and serene atmosphere, a place that felt impossibly safe. Their plan was simple: a day of sandwiches, sunshine, and the simple joy of being together. Leo's laughter echoed through the tall trees as he chased his bright red ball across a clearing near their picnic blanket. His father had just finished explaining the rules of a new game they were about to play. His mother was unpacking a small lunchbox, the one with cartoon rockets on it, placing it carefully inside Leo's blue backpack for later. The afternoon was unfolding with the gentle, predictable rhythm of a cherished family memory in the making. The moment the world fractured was as brief as it was absolute. The red ball, thrown with a little too much 7-year-old enthusiasm, took an unlucky bounce off a tree root. It skittered off the manicured grass of the clearing and disappeared into the dense underbrush that marked the forest's true beginning. Without a second's hesitation, Leo sprinted after it, his small form swallowed by the deep green shadows in an instant. His father called out his name, a casual warning not to go too far. It was the last time they would ever see him. When a minute stretched into 2, and then 5, the casual tone in Mark's voice tightened into a knot of concern. He and Sarah began calling for Leo, their voices rising in volume and pitch, trying to pierce the thick, sound-dampening woods. They walked the tree line, peering into the gloom, expecting to see him emerge at any moment, perhaps with a tear-streaked face and a scraped knee, but safe. Panic began its cold ascent up their spines as the minutes bled into a quarter of an hour. The woods did not answer back. The forest that had seemed so tranquil and welcoming just moments before now felt menacing, a labyrinth of silent, watching trees. The alarm was officially raised just before 5 in the afternoon. A Clackamas County Sheriff's deputy was the first to arrive, his initial calm assessment quickly giving way to the grave reality of the situation. A 7-year-old boy was missing in a wilderness that spanned over 1 million acres. As dusk began to bleed through the canopy, The clearing at Trillium Creek transformed into a frantic hub of activity. Search and rescue teams arrived, their bright orange vests a stark contrast to the deepening blues and greens of the fading day. Headlamps cut beams through the darkness, and the methodical process of a large-scale search operation began. The initial hours were filled with a desperate, fragile hope. Professional searchers and local volunteers fanned out in carefully coordinated grid patterns, their voices calling Leo's name into the night. They were trained to look for signs: a dropped toy, a footprint in soft earth, a scrap of torn clothing. The working theory was that Leo had become disoriented after chasing his ball, a common enough occurrence. A child, lost and frightened, would likely try to find shelter or simply sit down and wait. The searchers believed they would find him cold and scared, but alive. By morning, the operation had swelled dramatically. State police joined the county sheriff's department, and a helicopter was brought in, its rotors thumping a rhythmic beat of urgency over the forest. It circled for hours, using thermal imaging cameras to scan the dense canopy for any sign of body heat. But the forest floor was a cold blanket, and the trees guarded their secrets jealously. On the ground, canine units were deployed, their powerful noses tracing scents through the undergrowth. But the trail seemed to go cold almost immediately, just a few yards from where Leo was last seen. It was as if he had simply been plucked from the earth. Investigators considered and systematically dismissed the most common theories. The idea of a runaway was quickly discarded. There was no trouble at home, and Leo's bank account, a small piggy bank in his room, was untouched. More ominously, they explored the possibility of an animal attack. The region was home to cougars and black bears, but forensic specialists who examined the area found no signs of a struggle, no blood, and no drag marks. An animal attack, they concluded, would have been a violent, messy event, and the scene of the disappearance was unnervingly pristine. That out of days turned into a week, and the hope that had sustained the searchers and Leo's family began to fray, then unravel completely. The massive active search was eventually scaled back, the volunteers sent home, the command center dismantled. A small team of detectives remained assigned to the case, but their leads had dried up. They had interviewed every person who was at the campground that day, every registered sex offender within a 50-mile radius, but nothing emerged. Leo Carter's disappearance became a mystery, defined not by its clues, but by the utter lack of them. The forest had swallowed a child, leaving not so much as a whisper behind. The ensuing silence was the loudest sound of all. For Mark and Sarah Carter, life became a suspended state of being, an unending vigil. Every phone call could be the one. Every news report about an unidentified child found elsewhere sent a jolt of equal parts terror and hope through them. The case went cold, filed away, under a thick layer of newer, more active investigations. The world moved on, but for the Carter family, time remained frozen on that sunny August afternoon, forever trapped in the moment a red ball rolled into the woods. 8 years passed. 8 years of seasons, turning the Oregon woods from green to gold to white, and back to green again. The world changed in countless ways, but the mystery of what happened to Leo Carter remained a static, painful scar on the community. And then, 2 students from Portland State University, chasing a rumor of a hidden waterfall, decided to bushwhack their way through a section of the forest miles from any established trail. They were tired and about to turn back when one of them, shielding his eyes from a stray beam of sunlight, looked up into the branches of a particularly massive Douglas fir. He saw a flash of unnatural blue. Getting a clear look at it required binoculars. It was a child's backpack, unmistakably. It was snagged on a thick branch, at least 30 feet from the ground, swaying gently in the breeze. The absurdity of its position was staggering. It was far too high for a child to have climbed. It was too high for someone to have thrown it with any accuracy. The hikers called the sheriff's department, their voices a mixture of confusion and awe. They knew they had found something important, though they couldn't yet grasp the true depth of its significance. The recovery of the backpack was a delicate and eerie operation. A professional tree climber from the search and rescue unit had to ascend the fir, carefully navigating the branches to retrieve the weathered nylon pack. When he brought it down, the law enforcement officers on the ground felt a collective chill. The backpack, though faded by years of exposure to the elements, was in remarkably good condition, and more unsettlingly, all its zippers were fully closed. It had been placed there intentionally and sealed. The case of Leo Carter was instantly resurrected from the cold case files. The backpack was sent to the state crime lab for forensic analysis. When technicians carefully unzipped the main compartment, they were met with another shock. Inside was a plastic lunchbox adorned with faded cartoon rockets. And inside the lunchbox were the uneaten contents of Leo's lunch: a neatly cut sandwich, a bag of apple slices, and a juice box. Everything was preserved in a mummified state, a perfect tableau of a lunch that was never eaten. This discovery ruled out any lingering theory of a simple accident. An animal didn't zip up a backpack. A lost and frightened child would have eaten his food. This was the work of a person. Someone had taken Leo, and for some unknowable reason, they had climbed 30 feet up a massive tree to hang his backpack. Why? Was it a marker, a trophy, a bizarre, cruel joke? The discovery shifted the entire focus of the investigation from a missing person case to a homicide. The backpack was no longer just a clue. It was a message. A deliberate act by a killer who had, for 8 years, kept a perfect secret. The case was assigned to a new lead investigator, Detective Isabella Rossi, a cold case specialist known for her meticulous approach and her refusal to let go of a puzzle. Detective Rossi began not with the old files, but with the tree itself. She focused on its location, using topographical maps and satellite imagery. The Douglas fir stood on a ridge that, while remote, offered a clear line of sight to a single isolated property about a half-mile distant, a small, dilapidated cabin. Rossi pulled the property records for the cabin dating back to the time of Leo's disappearance. For 15 years leading up to and including that summer, it had been owned by a man named Arthur Finch. The name meant nothing to the original investigators. Finch had never been on their radar. He was a reclusive figure, a retired arborist who had lived alone and had minimal contact with the sparse community in the area. Neighbors, when interviewed years later by Rossi, recalled him as a strange and paranoid man, intensely private and prone to anger if anyone even neared his property line. He had sold the cabin and left Oregon abruptly, about a year after Leo vanished. Rossi felt a surge of adrenaline. The pieces were beginning to align. A retired arborist would have the skills, the equipment, and the comfort level to scale a 30-foot tree with ease. Tracking Arthur Finch down took weeks of painstaking digital detective work. He had moved to a small, unincorporated town in the Idaho Panhandle, living a life even more isolated than before. Detective Rossi coordinated with the Idaho State Police. They began surveillance on Finch's small, cluttered house. He was now in his late 70s, frail but still active. A ghost from a past that was about to violently collide with the present. with the evidence of the backpack's placement pointing towards someone with unique climbing skills. Rossi now had enough for a search warrant. The raid on Arthur Finch's property was conducted quietly on a cold Tuesday morning. Finch offered no resistance, only a look of quiet, detached surprise. His home was a hoarder's nest of old newspapers, tools, and bizarre wood carvings. It was in a locked metal footlocker tucked away in a dusty crawlspace that detectives found the heart of the case's darkness. Inside, wrapped in an old oilcloth, was a child's small, weathered red rubber ball. Next to it was a full set of professional arborists' climbing gear, ropes, a harness, and spiked boots. The discovery of the ball was the final, damning link. During the interrogation, Arthur Finch was unnervingly calm. He sat across from Detective Rossi, his hands resting on the table, and listened as she laid out the evidence. She described the backpack, the lunchbox, his career as an arborist, and finally, the red ball found in his home. For a long time, Finch said nothing. Then in a flat, emotionless voice, he began to speak. His confession was delivered without a hint of remorse, a simple recitation of facts that was all the more chilling for its banality. He told them he had been sitting on his porch that Saturday afternoon, seeking the peace and quiet he believed was his right. Then he heard the sound of a child's laughter from the distant campground. The sound, he said, irritated him. It was an intrusion. A little while later, a bright red ball rolled a few feet onto his property. He watched as the little boy, Leo, ran onto his land to retrieve it. In that moment, a cold, possessive rage took hold of him. This was his land, his solitude, his silence. And this child had violated it. Finch admitted he confronted Leo, grabbing him before he could run back to his parents. He took the boy back to his cabin to scare him, to teach him a lesson about trespassing. But the boy began to cry, and the crying infuriated Finch even more than the laughter had, so he made him stop. The motive for the murder was nothing more than a moment of profound, selfish annoyance. It was the senseless, pathetic rage of a man who could not tolerate the slightest disturbance to his isolated world. The most grotesque part of his confession was his explanation for the backpack. After he had buried Leo's body in a remote, unmarked grave deep in the forest, he was left with the boy's things. He could have burned them or buried them as well. But instead he saw an opportunity for a private, cruel monument to his crime. As a former arborist, the trees were his domain. He took out his old climbing gear, scaled the massive Douglas fir on the ridge, and deliberately hung the backpack high on a branch. It was a trophy, he explained, hidden in plain sight, a secret he could hold, knowing that this small piece of the boy he had erased would hang there, just out of view. A testament to his power and his perfect crime. Faced with his confession, Arthur Finch led detectives to the location of Leo Carter's remains. A forensic team recovered the boy's small skeleton from the shallow grave, finally allowing his family to bring him home. Finch was extradited to Oregon, where he was charged with aggravated murder. He offered no defense at his trial. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, condemned to spend the rest of his days in a cell, the ultimate loss of the solitude he had killed to protect. The discovery of a child's backpack, hanging like a strange fruit from a tall pine tree, solved an 8-year mystery. But the answer it provided was more horrifying than the unknown had ever been. It spoke not of a complex criminal mind or a grand, sinister plot, but of a chillingly simple and banal evil. A 7-year-old boy, full of life and laughter, had his future stolen from him, not for greed or revenge, but because his happiness momentarily disturbed a man who had forgotten how to feel anything at all. The case of Leo Carter became a permanent, somber reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not those who lurk in the shadows of the forest, but those who walk among us, hidden in plain sight.